Hello, YouTubers! Welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha. Today I'm looking at Dunkirk. Not the old movie, no, the one that's just come out in the cinema, the 2017 Chris Nolan movie. I know if you've been watching these reviews, I've said that I'm not reviewing many new films at the moment because I'm saving money and not going to the cinema a lot, but we thought we'd treat ourselves last night, and so we went to the cinema. It was a toss-up between Planet of the Apes and Dunkirk. And we were briefly considering Spider-Man now, but that was on a later showing. So it was a toss up between Planet of the Apes and Dunkirk, both of which I was interested and thought I'd enjoy most. In the end, we plumped for Dunkirk. The assumption being that we reckon we would probably enjoy Planet of the Apes, War for the Planet of the Apes. That is, if you're watching this in the future, we'd probably enjoy that film just as much on TV as we would at the cinema. Whereas I reckon we would probably enjoy, or maybe not enjoy is the right word, but appreciate Dunkirk a whole lot more on the big screen than we would on the small screen. Not that this film, having seen it now, not that it won't work on the small screen. I think there's enough good stuff in the film to work on the small screen. But this is one of those movies made by a filmmaker who's still interested, like Tarantino, he's still interested in the spectacle of cinema. He's still interested in projecting a film and having the cinematic experience, be an evening out, be an event, and that's what this film attempts to achieve in its filmmaking process, as well as telling an important historical event. My knowledge really of history mainly comes through movies. I have a broad sort of overall sense of what happens, but when it comes to things like Dunkirk and the specific battles of World War Two, obviously I knew the name Dunkirk, I knew the Dunkirk spirit, the famous phrase, but I knew very little about the details of Dunkirk leading up to this. I did a little research into it, and we found out it was the basically the evacuation of the British troops from northern France in 1941, which then led on to the Battle of Britain from 41 to 43, 44, and then leading up to I was going back into France in 44 and the D-Day landings. I knew prior to learning that Nolan this would be the subject matter of his next film, I knew very little about the actual battle itself. Well, it's not really a battle movie. It's about an event that takes place during wartime. It's about an evacuation, and much like Pearl Harbor, it's much or many of the events that took place in the early part of World War Two. It's more about a bombardment and ordinary civilians, or the Allies under in an extreme situation, and just battling for their lives, really, rather than the latter part of the war, which was much more focused on battling the enemy and battling evil and overcoming and triumphing, and everything that Churchill said. This really is. I have a real soft spot for. What's refreshing about this film is it tells a very British story, but on a Hollywood scale. much like, say, The Great Escape did back in the 60s. It's and that's refreshing. It's got an entirely British cast, um, and it's about a very British event, and it's about almost the British attitude to war. The screenplay for this was written by Chris Nolan himself, and it's minimal, sparse dialogue, and he really captures that sense of in wartime, which feels very genuine of the Brits being very understated, never resorting to the stiff upper lip cliche, but just us being very reserved in wartime. Us experiencing the events and the horrors of war, but never talking about them. That's the big thing you hear about the veterans and the survivors of World War Two is they very rarely spoke of their of what they experienced in World War Two. Well, actually, I would say that my grandpa was in World War Two. He was in the Navy, and if you asked him, he wouldn't shut up about what he saw in the war. He was kind of. So he never really lived up to that cliche. He was kind of Uncle Albert from Only Fools and Horses would be a good parallel. During the war could almost be his catchphrase. So going off on a tangent. So this film was made by Chris Nolan, and I'm a Nolan fan, and I've really enjoyed a lot of his work. When I say I'm a Nolan fan, I mean I genuinely am. His films have, even the ones that some considered to be maybe his lesser efforts. I'm always. I've been greatly impressed by his body of work to date. I'm not just saying this as a sort of a knobby film buff who saw Memento back in whenever that film came out, the early noughties, and from then on just decided that Nolan could do no wrong. Genuinely, everything he did after I mean, I am that, but genuinely, like everything he did after Memento, I've always kind of. I don't think I've ever really, expected great things of Nolan, but he's always, more often than not, he's impressed me more than I was expecting. Right from Insomnia. I'm going to talk about the Dark Knight trilogy one day because I'd say all three of those films impressed me more than I was expecting, and I'm including the third one in that. That film was greatly maligned by a lot of critics as being either disappointing following the heights that the Dark Knight set. Or being flat out bad, and I think that's absolutely rubbish. If The Dark Knight Rises is a bad film, I don't know what a bad film is. Yes, it has its flaws, but all Nolan films have flaws in them. But a bad film, no. Line that film up next to Batman v Superman, and you'll see, you'll see there what a bad Batman film looks like. So I'm a Dark Knight Rises apologist. Interstellar, I really enjoyed. Again, it is flawed. It's there's way too much exposition. I mean, I've watched that film twice now. I had to, after I watched it, I had to give it a second viewing just to take in all the exposition. And there is way too much of it. I mean, when Matt Damon comes in at the start of the third act, and he basically spends the first 10 minutes of his screen runtime laying on heavy exposition, and it's like, oh god, you've had two whole acts of nothing but exposition, and they're still laying it on in the third. So that's I mean, that is a problem with that film. But there's so much to admire in that film, just from the fact that you can still make a science fiction film using largely practical effects. It's stunning that Nolan gets to make all these films and use largely practical effects still, and Dunkirk's no exception. It's just unheard of these days. Nolan really is a one of a kind. He seems to have the Midas touch. He seems to get away with these things. I mean, just releasing a war movie in July, sandwiched between Spider-Man and Planet of the Apes, and it being a hit, and not, people going to see it as a genuine summertime blockbuster and not as an awards-worthy film you might find later in the year or early January. It goes against the grain, and having an entirely British cast, and making a film about a British battle and not a film about the D-Day landings or something that happened in the Pacific. Just being able to get away with that, he just makes all these moves as a filmmaker that you just shouldn't be able to get away with, and yet he manages it somehow. So I'm greatly impressed with his body of work. Funny enough, the one I might have to give a reassessment of it, but the one that of all these films that didn't really chime with me the same as it did with a lot of people was Inception. That I found, I don't know, there was something in that that prevented me from engaging with it. It was an imaginative and it was a fun action movie, but I never really considered it to be quite the masterpiece that most people thought it was. But I'm sure I'll reassess that and do a video on it at some point, and go into that in more depth, because I'm sure you're not all going boo now. But we're not here to talk about Inception. We're here to talk about Nolan's latest offering, Dunkirk, which I did think was great. Very little to criticise. I do have some nitpicks, which I'm going to get on in the latter half of this interview. Oi, stop. I don't know why I have them in here when I do these. So, what did I like about the film? There was tonally, it felt a lot like Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, which funnily enough, just the other day I saw a video in which Nolan talked about his top 5 favourite films. I believe Blade Runner was in there, but one of them was The Thin Red Line, and I love the Thin Red Line. And what's great about this film is it does feel like The Thin Red Line, but with all the pretentious elements taken out of it. No whispering voiceovers or but not to take away from The Thin Red Line, because the Thin Red Line is a fantastic film, and it does have some Well, yeah, again, that's a film that I'm going to definitely do a video on, and because that's a film I could really talk about in depth. But he takes the this film really feels like a lot of Nolan films. It feels like he's basically got away with making an art house movie, but with $100 million budget, and that this film feels more like a tone poem than a narrative. Like the Thin Red Line, there's no central character. You just kind of flit from character to character to character, and you get these little vignettes, these little fragments of story, and that's what you can get away with that in a war movie. Again, it goes against the grain. Convention dictates that you need a central protagonist. You need at least some central figure to root for. But in a war movie, you don't. You're making a film about war. Going from character to character to character like that can create a fragmentary, just disjointed quality to a film, and in a funny sort of way that encompasses the feeling of war much more authentically, I think, than maybe something like Saving Private Ryan does, where you do follow central protagonists, because war is fragmentary. War is haphazard. War is you'll get a narrative in war that's cut off in real life, and what am I saying? Yeah, but war is fragmentary, and so is the narrative in this film, and that's how you get away with it. Will you stop? Oh God! Oh, there's a bit of realism. Oh, you're about to see me murder my cat. Hans Zimmer did an amazing job with this score. A criticism with modern scoring is that you don't get themes really anymore. You just get you just get the emotion scored, and I mean that's true, but you've got to move with the times. Themes do feel a bit passe now, and the work of Hans Zimmer is really moving in a different direction, where you get a score that's where you get the emotion of the situation that's just purely scored throughout the film, and Hans Zimmer really is the king. He's kind of at the forefront of that, and he did a great. I really I got that now watching this film. I thought the old movie theme, having when Indiana Jones enters the room, that's really dead now. I think, because this is the way to do it now in the 21st century, just to purely score the emotion, and he does an absolutely masterful job. He really cut his teeth, I think, in the Dark Knight films and previous Nolan films with that, because the film has a kind of ticking clock vibe to it, and that's you can hear that all through the score. It's a very sort of metronomic score. Really does a great job at putting the audience on the edge of this seat, because the countdown to something terrible that's happening is on its way, and Zimmer does a fantastic job. You never see the Germans in this film. They're kind of like in Apocalypse Now. You never see the Viet Cong. It's the Germans are treated as an unseen, malevolent force, because like I say, it's not really about fighting the Germans. It's about escaping from the Germans, and not seeing Nazi officers gives the film a more tense feel. That it feels more like they're battling the environments rather than. I think it would be less tense, less dramatic if Nolan had reduced the story down to man battling man. Fantastic sound design as well as the fantastic score. This one of the reasons for seeing this in the cinema is I'm sure this is something that's going to be diminished when you watch it on TV, because right from the opening moments, the first time you hear gun fire in the film, it blows your ears out. I really wish I'd seen this at the IMAX. We just didn't have time though to get over to Birmingham which is where the nearest IMAX is to us. So we saw it on just a local Odeon screen. I'm pretty sure, because I know a lot of this film was shot with IMAX cameras. I love that. I love the fact that's something else that Nolan's pioneering is IMAX, because I've been saying since I was a kid, and I used to go and watch documentary films at the IMAX, why aren't they making feature films on the IMAX? It's so immersive. It's better than 3D. 3D is kind of the cut price IMAX. An IMAX screen is if you sit closest to it, it's usually all you can see in your viewpoint, and that becomes more 3D than 3D. I saw Avatar in 3D at the IMAX, and if ever there was a film I just felt I was surrounded by, that it was that. That's going to be a regret in not seeing this film in IMAX, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't. They hadn't formatted it properly when I saw it, because it was cropped. There was I'd never seen this before in a cinema screen, but there was the borders at the top and the bottom of the screen. I thought, that's unusual. I'm pretty sure that wasn't Nolan's intention for it to be screened like that. There's some I don't know about how things are projected, but I'm sure somebody's not doing the job properly there. Maybe that's something to do with the 65mm, 35mm conversion. But yeah, so like I said, the sound design of the explosions and the gunfire, it rings in your ear, and by the end of the film, you feel almost as shell shocked as some of the characters in this. Fantastic performances throughout the film. In particular, Mark Rylance. He covers the sea-based part of the film. He basically represents he basically represents the Dunkirk spirit. His story involves him and his two sons sailing their own private boat across the channel to rescue some of the troops. And Mark Rylance is always fantastic. I loved him as the BFG. He has real heart and soul in this, and he really personifies the British reservedness, where he's a very, very calm character, but at several points in the film, his sons ask him, maybe we should turn back, maybe we should turn around, and at one point he just breaks, and he almost sounds like he's about to cry. And he says, "No, we've got to go on to Dunkirk, boys." And then you get little snippets of character, like he knows about shell shock when he meets Cillian Murphy's character, and he says that he's never going to be right again. Shell shock is, I guess, what we what we call PTSD now. Um, yeah, PTSD. So there's suggesting maybe he was a World War I veteran. I got to also cite Kenneth Branagh in this film, who gives a brilliantly understated performance. He's the hopeful captain on the beach. He's leading the evacuation, and a greatly understated performance. You can see him visibly getting tired more and more tired as the days progress and the film progresses, and but still ever hopeful. And there's a great moment in the film, a real the film that gives me a big rubbery one of patriotic pride, where he's just looking out to sea in his binoculars, and he says, "I see it. What's home?" And then they see all the civilian boats coming across, and great moment of patriotic pride that every red-blooded Englishman must must absolutely go crazy over. And then there's another great moment later on in this film where I love great actors, and when actors get to a certain age and they've been doing it a long time, I think actors always improve with age. You rarely get a bad old actor. And not that Kenneth Branagh's old, but he's I think he's in his 50s now. But he knows enough tricks now, having done stage and screen work for so many years, and directed great actors as well, of course. That he's able to pull off these really impressive moments. There's a moment towards the end of the film where he thinks he's going to die, and the audience knows this because he tells the audience with a look, that it's just a little moment, but it really impressed me. Like it's just the moment where you see it register it just through his facial expressions. You see Kenneth Branagh realizing he's about to die, and the sort of resignedly accepting his fate and accepting it like a gentleman, and believe me, it's just all there in his eyes. He doesn't say a word, and I just thought, wow, there's a great actor. A really maybe slightly underappreciated actor in many respects, because he's probably more known for being a director, but there's a professional, there's a pro who can convey all that information just in a single look. So big props to Rylance and Branagh, and to a lot of the unknown younger cast as well. Love the aerial footage in this film. Mark Hardy. Another Nolan film where Mark Hardy's basically just got his Bane outfit on in this. He's got his face covered and he's got the bomber jacket on. He's just in a biplane this time. But I always loved aerial combat stuff as a kid. I think it probably stemmed from seeing both Top Gun and Memphis Belle very close together, and so I always loved that stuff. And stuff like The Aviator with Christopher Reeves, and Biggles' Adventures in Time. Was a big favourite as a kid, and I've never seen Red Tails, but I haven't seen a good aerial combat movie in a while. You really got to watch Star Wars to see that kind of stuff these days, and so it felt very nostalgic to see the aerial combat scenes in this film, and I was thinking, oh God, I'd love to see more aerial combat movies. In fact, I'd like to see another Biggles movie. Because there's only ever been one Biggles movie made to date, and it was made, post 1977. So they made it, I think, for the Star Wars market. They gave it this science fiction element that wasn't there in the original stories, which is, like I say, it was a childhood favourite of mine, Biggles Adventures in Time. But I suspect if I watched it again now, I'd see that it probably isn't very good. So yeah, let's do a Biggles movie. Hell, let's have Tom Hardy play Biggles. Why the hell not? The minimal dialogue, I've mentioned that already. A very sparse screenplay by from Nolan. Clocks in at 1 hour 45 minutes as well, which is very. If I had to guess what the running time of this film was going to be a year ago, and I've said, definitely between 2.5 and 3 hours, because that's just par for the course for movies these days, especially war movies. So, but Nolan's decision just to concentrate on the battle itself and leave very little exposition at hand. You don't really you get a few lines of text at the start, but all you need to know is that the British troops have run out of France, and they were really at the last points. I mean, they really were. Dunkirk is about as northernly to France. It's about as close to the UK as you can get without being in the UK. It's just across the channel. Have you come to apologise, you, for hurting me? If you've ever seen the start of Dad's Army, that's all you need to know about about the lead up to Dunkirk. Okay, I'm going to go into part two with this. I think part two is going to be a bit shorter, but because that's everything I liked about the films. I do have a few. They're not even criticisms; they're nitpicks. But yeah, I'll stop this there, and I'll see you all in part two.